Hey guys, I'm here with Representative Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today about your Syrian trip.
Thank you. Aloha to you and to all of your viewers.
Thanks. Obviously, Representative Gabbard is a favorite of progressives, and you're also a veteran, and you serve on the Foreign Services Committee. So this issue of this conflict in Syria is very near and dear to you. Just to start off, obviously there's been one narrative around your trip to Syria, which you took recently. You were there for, I believe, 4 days. And the narrative has been blared from every major media outlet who loves to, let's be real, kind of beat the war drum. However, they don't really seem to care about the fact that we are arming indirectly, I guess, some of the terrorists like Al-Qaeda and ISIS who are working with these so-called moderate rebels, if they exist at all. So those weapons are getting funded to them. Can you give your side of things? Because the media doesn't seem to be talking about anything except more intervention in Syria.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. This is such an important issue, and I'm so glad that you've spent time not only today, but in previous broadcasts focusing on the truth around this issue. As you know, for years now in Congress, I've been fighting to bring an end to our country's policy of interventionist, counterproductive regime change wars, particularly now in Syria. What many people don't know is that really since 2011, 2012, our government has been quietly providing arms, money, intelligence, and support, both directly and indirectly, to militant groups who are partnered with, allied with, or under the and working with ISIS and other terrorist groups. This has resulted in two things: a further heightening of the suffering of the Syrian people, the devastation and destruction of their communities, and a strengthening of the very terrorist groups that attacked us on 9/11 and others who do pose a direct threat to the American people and to the world. I have introduced legislation called the Stop Arming Terrorists Act to put an end to this madness where our government essentially is not abiding by the same principle or law that you and I are covered by. If you or I or any individual American provided direct or indirect support to terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, we would be convicted and thrown in jail. However, this support that our government has been providing directly and indirectly to these armed groups working with Al-Qaeda, or indirectly by sending that support through countries like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Qatar, who are also supporting these terrorist groups, this is something that is counterproductive to the national security interest of our country. It is counterproductive and worsening the suffering of the Syrian people, and it's something that we've got to bring an end to.
I agree with you, and I'm curious about your thoughts, because this arming of rebel groups and eventually terrorist groups dates back to even Reagan with Osama bin Laden, and it seems like a lesson that we haven't even learned at all, and it's bipartisan. Nobody seems to understand why we shouldn't be funneling money to different groups in this enormously complicated region, but so our overthrowing of regimes, that's been a disastrous policy. But I am curious because obviously Bashar al-Assad is a complicated figure. You got the opportunity to meet with him, and Amnesty International reported, I think, that he's killed like 13,000 opponents in a Syrian prison. So it seems kind of like it's like a lesser of two evils thing. How do you reconcile that kind of moral conflict?
The choice that we are faced with, that the leaders of the United States are faced with, is twofold. Either you have you continue conducting this regime change war, continuing to prolong and heighten the suffering of the Syrian people by supporting and strengthening and arming groups that are working directly with Al-Qaeda, therefore strengthening terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS, or on the other hand, you stop supporting these terrorist groups, you stop strengthening Al-Qaeda, and you engage with the Syrian government, you engage with Assad, because whether you like it or not, he is the president of that country. And for there to be any hope for peace, for there to be any hope for stability, where the Syrian people can move on with their lives, where the Syrian refugees can return home, there has to be a direct conversation engagement with President Assad and his government. That is the real world that we live in today. The reality is that if those who are waging this war to overthrow the Syrian government of Assad are successful, we will have a number of things happen, primary of which groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS will then take over all of Syria, worsening the suffering of the Syrian people, worsening the suffering of religious minorities and anyone who doesn't convert to their ideology, what to speak of the greater threat that it would pose to the world. These are the options that are presented before us. There is a third option that some have spoken of, which is an escalation of the war in Syria, an escalation where hundreds of thousands of U.S. troops would be mobilized to overthrow and obliterate the government, massive air power, potentially resulting in a direct military conflict with Russia, the other nuclear power in the world, what to speak of the devastation of the country. This would be similar to some kind of shock and awe that we saw in Iraq that would then put us in a position to commit trillions of dollars in a rebuilding of Syria, a nation-building effort there, and again, a protracted occupation of that country. These are actually the options before us. What I am proposing is the way to stop this war, the best way to create a path toward peace. Number one, stop providing arms, money, support to these groups that are working with and directly allied with Al-Qaeda and ISIS and other terrorist groups. Actually, number two, focus on actually defeating these terrorist groups that are destroying the Syrian people and their lives and that do pose a direct threat to the United States. And number three, engage with the Syrian government, engage with those who, whether we like it or not, have a direct stake in Syria's future. Engage with Assad without preconditions that he can or can't run. Allow the Syrian people to determine their own future for themselves. That is something that I heard from so many of the Syrian people who I met with from all different walks of life, is this incredible strength and pride in their country, this courage and resilience that even after everything that they have gone through, all of the hardship in these years and years of war, they are asking us to stop supporting these terrorist groups who have kidnapped and murdered their family members, who have raped and tortured their kids, who have shut down the schools in their country, and who have caused such great devastation. They want to be able to determine the future of Syria for themselves, a future that is secular and allows the same kind of freedom of religion that they have experienced now for generations.
Can you touch a little bit more on the fact that you were there and you spoke with Syrian individuals, and a lot of this policy is being determined by people who've never spoken to any of those people? You talked about it a little bit, but how specifically was your outlook changed or reinforced by speaking with Syrian people all throughout the country?
You know, so much of what I knew before was affirmed by going there and hearing directly from the Syrian people, people who I met on the street. Again, they were college students, religious leaders, small business owners, entrepreneurs, people from all walks of life. I was grateful to have the chance to hear from. I was struck again by their resilience and their courage. I was struck by how deeply rooted they are and their culture and society are in this non-sectarian, pluralistic society, and how important it is to them. I spoke, this happened time and time again, where people who I heard from, they almost felt ashamed and apologized even for even mentioning their religion. This is something they said we've never had to do. My best friend or my next door neighbor is Christian and I'm Muslim. That was never a part of anyone's conversation until this war began, where you have these armed militants that are being funded by outside countries, the United States, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, and others, who are allied and partnered with Al-Qaeda and ISIS and groups like them, who are the exact opposite of this non-sectarian society, to the extreme, where if you don't convert to their ideology, they will kill you. I mean, that is the stark reality that the Syrian people have been facing. And they want so much to be able to move on with their lives and to be able to get back to this place that they've lived and grown up in for generations, where people of all religions are living side by side peacefully. I think one of the other things that was very striking to me, and frankly that I was surprised by, was the effect and impact of the embargoes and sanctions on Syria. You know, this is something that was put in place by our government supposedly to punish the Syrian government, but the impact is really felt most directly in a very harsh and destructive way by the Syrian people themselves. Everything from having a great difficulty in getting basic necessities, in the area of food and medicine and just basic daily needs, but it's affecting these small business owners, these two women I met, for example, who went to college together. They taught school together. They were teachers for 15 years, and they decided, hey, let's start a business. So they started a sewing business and started actually hiring other people and other women into their business, and they grew to be quite successful. This war completely destroyed their business to nothing. They are trying slowly to rebuild, but these sanctions and the embargoes that are there are making it very, very difficult, if not virtually impossible, for them to be able to not only support themselves and their families, but to be able to be employers and to help try to bring a revival back for the Syrian people to where they can, again, be a stable and sustainable country going forward.
Yeah, I know you probably have to run soon, but I could ask you a million questions. I'm curious eventually about your thoughts on Turkey is kind of seeing a similar fundamentalist streak where they're reverting back to old school mentalities and extremism, and it seems to be kind of a swath around the region. I'm curious about your thoughts on that, but really because I know you have to go. I know that critics have said that you were kind of quiet about your trip, and I know that there's probably a reasoning behind that, so I was curious about your exact reasoning behind why you kept mum about it before you went to Syria.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's common sense. It's security. Going into a country where there are many different types of dangers, but primarily a strong presence from different terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Obviously, a security mindset and care went into our planning for this trip, which is why we kept it in a very close hold. The House Ethics Committee approved everything prior to going on this trip, and that's basically where we left it. The saying goes, loose lips sink ships, and we were very careful about that. I think it's ironic that there are some people in the media and reporters who are saying, oh my gosh, there's all this secrecy around this trip, and then at the same time they are criticizing me for going to a place that is not safe, or a place where there is not much security. So you can't win either way. It was a security decision that I made to keep this on a very close hold until after we left the country. And as you've seen since, doing interviews and just sharing with people the voices of the Syrian people who I met with, and the action, most importantly, the action that we need to take now here. If I may just close on this point that I heard from so many Syrians, again, from all different walks of life, asking a sincere question, not angry, but actually asking me, Tulsi, why is it that the United States is providing support, arms and other support to groups that are working with Al-Qaeda? Syria did not attack the United States on 9/11. Al-Qaeda did. And, you know, I didn't have an explanation for them. I couldn't answer their question, but this is the critical question that's facing the American people and leaders in Congress and this president today. Why are we doing this? And for those who are trying to divert the topic away from this important question, it's because they refuse to address the situation at hand. They refuse to admit the fact that they would rather support and arm groups that are working with Al-Qaeda and strengthen Al-Qaeda in order to overthrow this government, rather than actually recognize how crazy that idea is and how it's actually worsening the suffering for the Syrian people on the ground. And it's counterproductive to our national security interests. So this is why I'm pushing hard to get more members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, on my bill, the Stop Arming Terrorists Act, to put an end to this madness so that we are no longer using your taxpayer dollars to support and strengthen these groups that are working directly and indirectly with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, end this counterproductive regime change war, and work with those we need to work with to get Syria back on a path towards peace.
Very, very lastly, I'm so sorry, but I know that you are fighting a bipartisan effort to bring back GlassSteagall. This is a big tonal shift, but can you just give a quick update on the fight for that? Because President Trump just said he was going to do away with many of the provisions in Dodd-Frank, and a lot of Americans are quite frightened.
Yeah, you know, look, on the campaign trail, I believe Trump said that he would reinstate GlassSteagall. Yet we've seen a recent executive order asking Treasury for a plan on how to deregulate Wall Street. So I'm very concerned about this, because this is an issue that impacts communities like mine in Hawaii and people and families all across the country. You know, in my view, the problem with Dodd-Frank was not that it did too much, it did too little. The big banks that were too big to fail back in 2008 are even bigger and more powerful today than they were back then. And as you know, no one has been held accountable for the devastation that they've caused in people's everyday lives, the homes that were lost, the lives and retirements that were destroyed. So we have a bipartisan bill called the Return to Prudent Banking Act that would essentially reinstate a 21st century Glass-Steagall in order to separate those risky investment banking practices that Wall Street does on the backs of the American people from basic everyday commercial banking. This is one of the main things that caused the crisis in 2008. Again, it's a common sense bipartisan measure that we are looking to build more support for, and to remind President Trump that on the campaign trail, he said that he would do this.
All right. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you, Emma.
Thanks.